Gentleman's
is a
time.
failure.
Gentleman's
I
time has
yield back.
expired. The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I yield to myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
You know, Madam Speaker and members, we have these members on the opposite side of the aisle spending all of this time supporting the biggest, most profitable banks in the country. And yet, these members won't stand up for small business lending. They don't want the data so that we can understand what is going on and why people in this country, minorities in particular, farmers, small farmers, family farmers, etc., can get loans. Now, in the last decade, these mega banks made so much money. J.P. Morgan, $215 billion. Wells Fargo, $197 billion. Bank of America, $105 billion. Citigroup, $93 billion. And they repeatedly broke the law, even though they were making all of this money. And I want you to know they consider this is just the cost of doing business. And so we have here even more when we take a look at some of the other banks that paid fines. Instead of lending money, they'd rather pay fines instead of lending to the small business. What kind of fines are we talking about here? We fine them for all kinds of fraudulent activity. In the last decade, mega banks made so much money, and then they repeatedly paid fines. For example, the Bank of America paid $66 billion in fines. They could have been lending this to small business. J.P. Morgan, $43 billion in fines. They could have been lending this to small businesses. Citigroup, $19 billion in fines. They could have been lending this to small businesses. Wells Fargo, $12 billion in fines. And yet, some of our members want to say that, oh, we just want to shame these big banks. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Because it is a shame that they're so profitable that they do not want to spend time with small businesses. Takes up too much time. The small businesses don't earn as much money for the bank, etc. They don't even want them in the banks. And we've got to do something about that. We're shining a light on the existing practices of lenders, and if those lenders are charging minorities and small family farmers, etc., exorbitant interest rates, there's no reason that we should not get the transparency that we need to stop this. Now, you know, I tell you, one of the reasons you hear us being so passionate over here is because the big banks don't need you to defend them. They don't need you to stand up for them. You should be putting your time and effort into what you can do about the small. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of information. We have members on the opposite side of the aisle who felt they needed capital. And so when we did PPP, they came to the government competing with real small businesses that could not get capital. And not only did they take out the money, they have been forgiven for it. They didn't have to pay it back. I'm not going to talk about everybody, but I am going to mention Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's everywhere talking about everybody, claiming she's for small business. She took out $180,000, and she's been forgiven. I'm not going to talk about the rest of them, some of my friends over there, but I got a whole list of members on the opposite side of the aisle who took out PPP money, didn't need it. Some of them are as rich as cream. They took this money and they're not paying it back. And then they come in here and they talk about why we should not have transparency and do everything that we can for these small businesses who are desperate for capital. You can sing the song that you love small business all that you want. You can have the small business Saturday with a big fake kind of operation on small business lending in your community on Small Business Saturday. But it doesn't do any good if they don't get the capital. They need the money. They need to be treated fairly. And so, yeah, I want to shame the big banks. I want to shame them. You have one of these banks who even took out false accounts, made up accounts, and we had to stop them. We fined them, but you know what? They're too big to fail, and they keep doing what we are fining them about. And so with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the Chairman of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. McHenry, from the great state of North Carolina.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Small businesses are the lifeblood of the American economy. When you burden small business, you limit job growth. You limit economic gain. You limit economic opportunity. You limit American growth. With more regulation on businesses, it drives up the cost of doing business. I want to commend the chair of the Small Business Committee for this resolution that we have on the House floor today that is in support of American small business. This resolution would stop the CFPB's small business data collection rule, which is onerous, overly complex, and difficult to implement, but all American businesses would be burdened by it. And disproportionately, the small businesses that create most of the jobs in America. This rule would stifle American businesses' access to affordable credit, and it will facilitate the naming and shaming of lenders whose business practices are legal, non-discriminatory, and safe and sound. But the progressive activists on the left want to use that database so they can call out the things that they don't like for political activism. I don't think that's responsible. I don't think it's in the interest of the American economy, and it surely is not in the interest of consumer protection. Let's support this resolution. Let's oppose the rule. Let's support small business.
Yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I continue to yield to myself as much time as I may consume. And yes, I'm a political activist. I'm an activist for the people who send us here to represent them. I'm an activist for the least of these. I'm an activist for small business. I'm an activist for veterans. I'm an activist for children. I'm an activist for education, for better health care, and I'm very proud of it. But I tell you, it is shameful for us to continue to be dominated and controlled by the biggest banks in America, taking time on the floor of the People's House to defend them and to vote against the very people who send you to this House to represent them. It is absolutely shameful. And ladies and gentlemen, it is time to get out from under the influence and the control of the biggest banks in America and stand up for the people who really need to make these banks do what they should be doing, rather than saying, no, we're not going to comply with the law. And yes, we will pay the fines because we are rich. We have so much money we can do that. And so I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
May I request the balance of time for each side?
The gentleman from Texas has 13.5 minutes. The gentlewoman from California has 3.5 minutes.
Okay. Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman, Ms. Kim, from the great state of California.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I rise in strong support of Resolution 32. This is a CRA resolution to rescind the CFPB's final rule implementing Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank. I thank Chairman Williams and Senator Kennedy for their leadership to rescind the CFPB's harmful proposal. The rule is nearly 900 pages and requires lenders to report 81 data fields. If the CFPB's proposal is enacted, small financial institutions will be forced to devote more of their time to comply with burdensome regulations rather than focusing on providing loans for small business owners. With credit tightening for small businesses due to persistent inflation, higher interest rates, and an uncertain economic environment, the CFPB's Section 1071 rule would impose higher costs for small businesses and lead to a decrease in lending to small, minority-owned, women-owned businesses. Earlier this year, the CFPB suffered a major data breach when an employee forwarded consumer information of more than 250,000 to a personal email account. So how can we trust the CFPB to properly manage the collection of additional data when it cannot efficiently safeguard existing data? So I would urge Director Chopra to go back to the drawing board on Section 1071 and issue a rule that gets it right without punishing small banks and small credit unions with higher compliance costs and burdensome requirements. I strongly urge my colleagues to support this resolution and access to credit for small businesses by voting in favor of this resolution. With that, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I have no further speakers and am prepared to close. I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized to close.
Or you can do the closing, this closing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have no further speakers, and I am prepared to close if the gentleman from Texas has no further speakers.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I yield myself the balance of the time. When we started this debate, I mentioned Rashonda Young, who happens to be a young black woman from Waterloo who had many challenges getting a small business loan and sued the CFPB to complete the Section 1071 rule. After CFPB settled the case with her, Ms. Young said, and I quote, "I'm just humbled to be part of the process. Sometimes we feel so small, but this is one of those things that shows if we're willing to speak up, we actually can make a difference." End of quote. Ms. Young has since sold her business and is now working with other investors to try and open up the first minority bank in Iowa with the goal of being certified as a CDFI, offering the kind of small business loans to others that she had such a time obtaining. And let me just tell you something. We support CDFIs, the Community Development Financial Institutions. And why do we support them? Because they could not get loans from the banks in America. And so here we are, the taxpayers, further trying to help small businesses by supporting these Community Development Financial Institutions. They were developed because small businesses couldn't get loans. And then we have on the opposite side of an aisle people who are opposing how we can support these small businesses by getting the transparency done that we need to have done. They would rather support the biggest banks in America and have the taxpayers try to do something about small businesses with CDFIs than give their small business an opportunity. I want to tell you, I don't know how they're going to vote on the other side, but this issue is not going to go away. And I want to tell you that the constituents are going to learn in this country who's supporting small businesses. All of this talk and this rhetoric about I love small businesses, I support small business, will not continue to work. The fact of the matter is small businesses are shutting down. They are closing because they don't have access to capital. And so for all of those members on the opposite side of the aisle who took out PPP loans that have been forgiven, you ought to be ashamed, and you ought to not oppose the CFPB from trying to protect these small banks as the courts have told them to do. And so with that, Madam Chair, there's a lot more that can be said. We're going to continue to unveil this information about who is simply spouting rhetoric and who is actually doing something for small businesses. It is unfortunate that we have to fight this hard. We have to do everything that we possibly can because the banks don't want them in their banks. They don't want to be bothered with them. They're too small. We have small businesses who only need $50,000, $75,000 to improve their technology, to be able to take their businesses to a place where they can earn more money. We can't even start to talk about startup capital. None of them get startup capital. If they're able to convince anybody for a little capital to expand their businesses, they will do that. But otherwise, small businesses do not have the support of the Republicans in the House of Representatives.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
As it is seen here today. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as my colleagues and I have stated today, my biggest fear is that many lenders may decide to fully exit small business lending due to the overly burdensome collection requirements, or because they just don't want to put their small business customers in an uncomfortable situation. I do not believe this is the outcome Congress or the CFPB intend with implementation of this section of Dodd-Frank. I know, as a small business owner myself, if this rule goes into effect, it will not bode well for small businesses seeking the credit needed to grow and support their communities. That's the bottom line. And we need to help small businesses. We need to help them not only create jobs, but to create net worth among their employees. So I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. And Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the previous question is ordered on the joint resolution. The question is on the third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rule submitted by the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection relating to small business lending under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Regulation B.
The question is on passage of the joint resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I request a recorded vote.
A recorded.
I'm sorry I interrupted. I have to say it over and over again so I can get this
Does the
recorded
gentlewoman
vote.
request the yeas and nays? The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote of passage of the joint resolution will be followed by a 5-minute vote on adoption of House Resolution 878. This is a 15-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 221, the nays are 202. There are one voting present. The joint resolution is passed without objection. The motion to consider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the adoption of House Resolution 878, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 878, resolution providing for the expulsion of Representative George Santos from the United States House of Representatives.
The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Members record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 311, the nays are 114, with 2 recorded as present. 2/3 voting in the affirmative, the resolution is adopted, and a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The clerk will notify the governor of the state of New York of the action of the House. Under Clause 5D of Rule 20, the chair announces to the House that in light of the expulsion of the gentleman from New York, Mr. Santos, the whole number of the House is now 434.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Chris of New Jersey seek the floor?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet on Monday next, when it shall convene at noon for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Stanton of Arizona seek the floor?
Mr. Speaker, I ask to address the House out of order.
The House will be in order. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this morning we lost one of our greatest Americans. And today I rise, along with my colleagues representing all of Arizona, Republicans and Democrats alike, to honor the life and legacy of the most influential Arizonan in history, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who passed away this morning at the age of 93. Justice O'Connor spent her life breaking down barriers in pursuit of a more just society. She blazed every trail she set foot on, defying the odds stacked against women in the legal profession to rise to become Arizona's Assistant Attorney General, our first female majority leader in the state Senate, a Maricopa County Superior Court judge, and ultimately the first female justice on the United States Supreme Court. She brought her Arizona brand of pragmatism and independence with her to the Supreme Court and was often the swing vote on deeply consequential decisions. In the years since her retirement from the Supreme Court, I've admired her steadfast commitment to preserving our democracy through objective, fact-based, and collaborative civil discourse, through her creation of the Sandra Day O'Connor Institute, and of course through the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. Her work will inspire future generations to follow her example to become engaged and thoughtful civil participants. And with that, I want to yield time to my colleague, Representative Debbie Lesko.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you, colleagues, for standing in respect of a great woman. Not only a great woman for Arizona, but a great woman and trailblazer for all of American and all women across America. As was said, she was the first woman majority leader to serve in the Arizona Senate. She went on to be the first woman to serve as a Supreme Court justice. She stood up for truth. She stood up for justice. She's not only a wonderful woman and a representative of Arizona, but a wonderful American. And we are saddened by her passing, but she set the trail for all of us women. She was a great Republican, a great American, and we praise her each and every day.
With that, I ask the House to join me in a moment of silence. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Okay. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? You are in order. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to wish a happy 100th birthday to Ruth Sellers of Mariposa, although the general consensus around town is she's really in her mid-50s. But skeptical or not, the town's going to celebrate with her tomorrow, and from our nation's capital, I want to join them to express our love and respect. An Army brat, she spent her youth in pre-war China and the Philippines. In the war, when she wasn't Rosie the Riveter at the Newport shipyard, she was a USO volunteer where she met her husband, Earl. After a successful career at IBM, she retired to Mariposa